Okay, I think we can start now. Before we start the revision, I think I want to say a few words about your project and your presentation, right? Because that is the requirement of the Hong Kong IE if you really want to become an engineer in the future, right? That you need to have some experience to show your competence, right? To involve or manage such a complex project. So in your project, I hope you can get some experience of how to simulate some idea, right, for this complex project, right? All the projects supposed to be not simple project, right? Complex project, right? So you need to look the project in different angles, different dimensions, and then you balance them out, and then try to take out some key thing, and then you come up with idea. I think that should be the experience that you get from the project, right? Okay, so before we start the revision, of course, the thing that you are most interested is about the examination format and then the questions, that kind of thing, right? So your examination will be on December the 7th, if I remember correctly, in the evening. Is that right? Let me check it out. If I remember correctly, that your examination will be, in the evening, 6 o'clock, 6:30, on December the 7th. And the examination will be just 1.5 hours, 19 minutes, right? So that is not a very long examination. So I set up the paper like this. There will be 3 questions that you need to answer. And you have no choice, right? I set up 3 questions and then you need to answer all the questions. Because I don't want to waste your time to read through all the questions and then make your selection to select, well, the questions, right? Don't waste that time, right? Answer all the 3 questions. And all the 3 questions, they are related to cases, right? I will present you a case, of course, not very long and will not be very short, right? About half a page or maybe a little bit longer than half a page case, right? And then you read through the case, you need to understand the case, right? Understand the background, understand what is inside the case. And then after that, there will be several questions, right? To let you to show your opinion, right? Some of the questions related to the handout, and of course, when you answer, you need to relate it to your case too, right? And then some of the questions, definitely they are pointing to some of the issue in the case, and then you need to show your opinion, right? Like the cases we did in the lecture. Is it ethical for somebody doing this, right? And then you need to give me your opinion. And of course, I expect you to give the reason why, right? You are not just answer yes or no, and then you'll get all the marks, right? So you need to present why you think it's yes, why you think that is no, and why you think that that will be no problem, that kind of thing, right? If you do not have why, even though your answer is yes and my answer is yes, I cannot give you definitely not full mark, right? And then not even half of the mark, right? So because this is not arithmetic, that kind of numeric answer, that kind of thing, right? You need to show your opinion, right? And of course, you are not new students, right? I don't need to give advice to you, right? You need to manage your time to answer the question, right? Some of my small questions, they will carry only 5 marks. Some of them will carry 15 marks. And then you need to manage your time to allocate your time to answer these small questions, right? According to your management, right? In the past, I think some students, the short question is just 5 marks, and then they answer 1 page, 2 page, explain very detailed. Yes, I appreciate very much, but but the maximum mark I can give you is just 5 marks, right? Because I cannot give you more than 5, right? According to that small question, right? So try to manage your time. You should know, right? Because you are not new students, right? Okay, so we can start. Any question about the examination? Maybe I see the chat room. Oh, we see the closed book examination. Oh, good question, right? I missed that. It is a closed book examination. Closed book, you are not allowed to bring any handout, of course, computer, mobile phone, that kind of thing. Right? That is a closed book examination. Good question, right? That is an important question. I missed that part. Okay, so any more questions? If no, we can start the revision. And of course, this year is a face-to-face examination, right? That definitely you need to write on the answer book, right? It doesn't like past year, right? Online examination, you can type by your computer, right? This year is face-to-face, right? You need to write all your answer on the answer book. And of course, you need to write it a little bit clear, right? Because if that is not clear enough, I may not be able to understand or to read your word and statements, then there will be problem, right? I misunderstand your thinking, right? So write it a little bit more clear. The key thing is how to manage your time, right? So in the past, I can see some students, they just sit there and then thinking, but not writing, and then waste a lot of time, right? Okay, if there is no more question, okay, 2 more things from the chat room. Okay, let's see. Can we have some sample exam question? No, I think the sample exam question is exactly that we did during the lecture, right? All those cases, I think we did so many cases, right? If you recall in some of my lecture, right? My lecture is not very long, and then I leave some time for the cases. That is the cases, right? You need to read the cases and then try to think about what is the opinion that you are asked in the small questions, short questions. Let's say my printing quota. Well, maybe you refer the handwriting, right? Yes, this year is handwriting. Face-to-face exam, like the old days, right? Okay, no more question. I think we can start the revision very, very quick, right? Because as I said, all the slides, they are exactly the same, right? From the lecture, right? Nothing new. So in lecture 1, we talk about introduction of profession, right? So you recall the introduction, right? So we discuss what is a profession, right? Profession is a commitment. You need to qualify, and then you need to skill in, and then you possess your knowledge to affect others, right? So this is the basic thing about profession. And we have a complete definition of professionalism. In your examination, you don't need to memorize this, right? But you need to understand this, and then you can present it by your own word, right? Something like that, right? So try to think about those highlight statements or words, right? The key words, right? Profession is the individual, voluntary, and then doing something in a moral, permissible way, right? Beyond the law, market, and public opinion would otherwise require, that kind of thing, right? So you need to understand this definition. And then you need to understand the 3 types of ethics, right? What is the common morale, what is the personal morale, and then what is the professional ethic, right? The key thing is, once that is a conflict between your common morale and the professional ethics, or your personal morale and the professional ethic, which one should come first, then you need to know, right? If you join the profession, like if you join the engineering profession, definitely professional ethics should come first, then your common morale, then the personal morale, right? So you need to understand this. And then there are some characteristics, right? There should be a formal code, there should be something important in the profession, right? Like the engineering profession, definitely what is important, of course, safety and health of the public people, right? And then that should be take precedence over your personal conduct, personal morale, right? Something like that, right? You didn't understand all these characteristics. Maybe you are asked, right? Can you show me some characteristic of professional ethics? Then you need to understand some and then explain it to me. So lecture 2, that is about the responsibility of engineers, right? So I give you some example, which is a full statement. This statement already explained the whole thing about when you become a professional engineer, right? So, which is a important and learned profession, right? If you are a member of this profession, you are expected to exhibit the highest standard of honesty, integrity, right? That you are direct and vital impact on the quality of life of all the people. And then you expect to be honesty, impartiality, fairness, and equity, right? And you are dedicated to the protection of public health, safety, and the welfare, right? So that describe the whole statement that once you become an engineer, you need to have this requirement, and then you need to do this, right? And then that is one very important concept about the standard of care, right? Standard of care is how much care you can show to the other people when you come up with a decision, right? So engineer is not liable, responsible, or damaging for every error. Right? You are not responsible for everything, right? But on some of the most important things, right? If the error is shown to have worse than a certain level error, the engineer is liable, right? For some of the important things, you must be holding responsibility and liable, right? If there is any problem or accident coming up from your responsibility, if you are missing something, then you have to be responsible, right? Or maybe even become a court case, right? So how much standard of care you put to the project, you need to prove in front of the court or in front of the judge or in front of the public, right? But even we know this, still there are something that is resists our responsibility, right? So we need to go back about what are those things, right? So this is the key thing about lecture 2, responsibility of engineer. In the third lecture, that is done by Dr. F.C. Chen, right, about the Hong Kong Institute of Engineers. The thing that you have to understand is about how to become a member, Hong Kong IE member, of course, right? So you are supposed to have several routes, engineering graduate training route, which is the shortest route to become a professional engineer, right? I think in our case, you need to have 2-year training. 3 years is for civil engineering, right? Cannot be your case. 2-year training and then 2 years responsible experience, and then you can apply for corporate member, right? Or if you do not join this graduate training route, you use this general experience route, you need to have minimum of 6 years. Or if you are apply later, right, for mature people, right, then you will have minimum of 15 years of experience. But even though you are qualified to apply, you need to go through the professional assessment, right? Interview and then an essay writing. And he also talked about this engineering graduate training scheme, right? We call it the Scheme A, right? So this kind of Scheme A is organized with some of the qualified company, right, to provide some training to the graduate engineer. And once you join this Scheme A training, after the training, 2 more years experience, you can apply for a corporate member, right? So that is the Scheme A training. And then he also explained about the competence-based professional assessment, right? Actually, I also went through all these 12 elements in the introduction, right? So the requirement of these 12 elements of competence, right? You have to understand by yourself, right? Basically, this 12 element is the experience you get from your project, right? Because they ask you, you need to define, investigate, analyze complex engineering problem, you need to design, develop solution, and then responsible for making decision, and then manage part of this complex engineering activity, right? Basically, that is part of your project experience. Of course, you are not going to realize the project, right? If you realize the project, you need to show that you manage part of the activity of your project, right? So 12 elements, right? So you need to identify, manage your engineering risks, and then you need to conduct the activity to ethical standard described by the Hong Kong IE. Of course, in the examination, I will not ask you to tell me the 12 element of competence, right? Because basically, I'm not supposed to ask you to memorize all the things, right? You are not secondary school student, right? But I need you to understand this and then try to explain it through the case, right? So those are the key things of Dr. Chan's presentation. Fourth lecture, we talk about the sociological thing, right? Which is the social dimension thing, very related, right? We talk about the social stratification, right? The people in the society actually are divided into many different kind or different layer or different ranking, right? And the three different differentiation related to the social ranking, gender, ethnic, and the racial, right? And the social ranking divided by the social class, right? Divided by the income. You can divide also by the status, right? And also the social power, right? Which is the social stratification. Why we need to understand this? Because as an engineer, I think we need to help those people which are most needed, right? For our expertise to help them, right? Then you need to understand what kind of people that are involved in this society that require more help or more needed from us, right? And then you need to understand the social class, which class of people, they are the most needed people that we need to help them, right? And the one important thing is, as an engineer, we have a lot of chance to design some work for the people, right? Design some system, like your project, right? Maybe you need to design some system or some elements, right? That the people can work with you, right? So when you come up with your design, you need to think about what will be your work related to the society. How the people, when they work in your design, right? What will happen, right? Is it safe for them? Is it efficient for them? Or is it too boring for them? All this, you need to put it into consideration, right? Like what kind of technology you want to choose, right, for your work design, right? Are you going to choose something that are actually harmful to the worker or harmful to the staff, right? Then you need to consider. So that brings to the thing about the importance of work, right? What kind of work actually is most people like, right? Do they like some work that is repetitive? That means repeat and repeat, right? Do they really like to work in a noisy environment or frustrating environment, right? So your answer is no. Nobody would like to work in this kind of environment. Then when you decide to work for them, you need to know what kind of thing that you need to put to your design, right? So that is the importance of the work. And then you need to understand the social power, how the power divided in the society, right? Of course, the power can be because of the difference of gender, right? Men and women, right? And then, of course, that can be also from other things, right? Like from the trade union, from your employer, from the employee, right? What power is influencing different people, that kind of thing. right? So that is a sociological thing related to engineer. Economics, that is the money thing. So we need to understand what is meant by the wealth. Wealth from the engineer's perspective, right? Is it just the money, right? Or the jewelry, or the bank account money, that kind of thing, right? From engineer point of view, yes, those are a kind of wealth, right? But we should think more than that, right? Some of the things, right, like the culture is also a kind of wealth, belongs to the society, right? Like the parks, you can imagine it is also a kind of commonwealth, right, for the community, right? So we use a broad sense, right, about the wealth. And then we talk about macroeconomics. Macroeconomics is something that we cannot control because that is happen for the global economics, which we cannot control. But what we can do is just adapt to this macroeconomics by doing something, right? Like the national output, investment level, unemployment rate, inflation, price and quantity of credit, all these are basically determined by the government or determined by the other country, but you need to adapt to it. That is what we call the macroeconomic. Microeconomic is about your market, right? That is the company that you involved in that market, right? That is the microeconomic. For microeconomic, you can control, right? Because you are actually part of the market, and then you need to adapt to this environment, and then make your decision, and then affecting the market, and eventually that become an automatic market, right? Because you should have some competitor, and then you do something, your competitor will, of course, will doing something, reflecting your actions, and then it become a automatic thing, right? So this is the microeconomics. And then engineer economists, of course, we are not economists, but we contribute a lot, right? One thing that we contribute a lot is the project evaluation, right? We use our engineering knowledge, right? So that we assess how to use the capital, how you use the money, can we get the output, right? That kind of thing, to evaluate a project, whether we should go ahead or not, right? Again, in your project, maybe you present a lot of things, right, about your economic dimension, right? Some groups, they present about the payback. Actually, you are using the payback to evaluate your project, right? Whether that is justified to become a real project or not, right? So we also touch base on the market economics, right? Market economics is about how you can run your company in this market, in this country, and then what thing that you need to be aware of, right? For example, the culture of the people, right? The legal thing about the market, that kind of thing, right? So lecture 6, that is from the ICAC, right? Ethics in practice. So basically, they said the corruption usually will affect this area, procurement, that is purchasing department, right? Buying something from your supplier, right? Or somebody handling confidential information, or sales and marketing, right? Or personnel and financial management, right? Usually they will affecting this area most. Doesn't mean that other area will not have this kind of corruption. So you need to understand this prevention of bribery ordinance, right? POBO, right? POBO is about cover both public servant, private sector, right? Not just the public servant will be involved in this POBO, right? Protecting the interests of the different stakeholder and then ensure the fair pay, right? That is the basic thing about this prevention of bribery ordinance. And then, what is a corruption? They said there will be 4A. That must be an agent, right? Employee, employer. That must be an advantage. right? That must be an action, and that must be related to whether approval or not, right? If you, without the principal's approval, and then you are doing something related to your principal business, and then you accept an advantage, and then you are an agent, definitely you involved in this corruption, right? And then your maximum penalty is 7 years imprisonment and $500,000 in Hong Kong, right? So who is agent? Agent is employer, employee, or somebody you are working for, acting for another person, right? Agent and principal. So she also present about what does mean by the advantage, right? All this, you see all these blue blocks, they are advantage, right? The gift, reward, service, right? Employment contract, that can be advantage, except one thing, that is the entertainment, right? But of course, entertainment, they still have some condition, right? You are supposed to consume on the spot for the entertainment. She also present the conflict of interest, right? I also cover the conflict of interest in the lecture, right? Because why that is so important about the conflict of interest? Because the end of the conflict of interest can be corruption, right? They present the conflict of interest like this, right? That is a company interest, and that is a private or personal interest, right? Your private and personal interest is more important than the company interest. In that case, you can never make a fair judgment, right? In that case, when you did not declare that you involved in this conflict of interest, right? Then the people will think you are not fair, right? You may be accepting some advantage, right? Otherwise, you will not do that, right? So that is the corruption. So the consequence can be the abuse of the authority, criticism, or complaint, and then the worst case is corruption or other criminal offense, right? How to handle? To avoid as far as possible, to declare to the company in accordance with the company code of conduct, right? So that is the advice. Basically, exactly the same as my last lecture, right? So lecture 7, we talk about safety and the risks. So of course, we start with some basic concept of safety, right? Safety, why we need safety? Because nobody wants to be threatened or harmed by something, right? The safety is not free because you need to build the safety, right, to the product or to the surface, right? But that is no absolute safe, right? Safe for one person may not be safe for some other person, right? So that you need to understand this, right? And then we discuss about the definition of safety, right? In the original, that is a simple definition, but somebody challenged, right, the definition, right, saying that there will be somebody they never judge safe, they overestimate, and some of them they underestimate, and then finally we come up with this modified definition of safety. That is, a thing is safe where its risk fully known. Those risks would be judged acceptable by a reasonable person in light of settled value principles, right? So safety is judged by some reasonable person, and then they know the risks, right? And then they connect with the value principles, and then they come up with the final judgment whether that is safe or not safe, right? So that is the final statement. Safety and risk is always come together, right? Risk is talking about something happen maybe in the future, maybe they never happen, right? But if that happen, that will cause harmful, right? So that is what we call the risk, right? So the risk is a potential, right? Potential doesn't mean that they will definitely happen a lot, right? Potential, that means they have a chance that that can happen, right? Something unwanted, harmful may occur, right? So in that case, we need to assess the risk. If we can assess the risk and then we think, well, that is a risk, what you need to do something for prevention, right? Or change the design to avoid this risk or minimize this risk, right? Using your technology, using your whatever thing that you think is appropriate, right, to make it more safe by reducing the risk, right? So acceptability of the risk, that means somebody will accept the risk, right? Accept the risk, that means they feel very safe, right? Because they accept the risk, right? So a risk is acceptable when those affected are generally no longer or even not apprehensive about it. Apprehensive, that means no longer worry about this, right? Or not worry about this. Then you think the risk is acceptable. You think that this is safe enough, right? So that is the acceptability of the risk, right? Of course, you can make the people, you can present something for the people so that is so nice, and then the people accept the risk, right? So we also discussed about the information you pass to the public can be affecting their judgment, right? So refer back to my handout, the information can also affecting the people whether they accept the risk or not, right? So the engineer reliability for the liability for the risk is you need to estimate the risk, even though we think that it's difficult to estimate, right? Because that maybe that never happened before, maybe you don't expect that will happen, right? But still, if that is the risk that you can expect something, then what you need to do is you take some remedial action, right? And then try to do something to minimize all this risk, right? So that is your liability, right? Think about this kind of risk, acceptable risk, can be wielded by different people, right? The risk expert, maybe you are the risk expert, right? Because you understand the risk and safety. Maybe lay people, that means the public people, they don't have any kind of knowledge about safety or something like that, right? All people will wield differently, right? And then you think about what happened to the public people, right? So if you are engineer, your responsibility about the risk is aware of the fact that risk is difficult to estimate, aware that there are different approaches to determination of the risk, and then you need to assume the responsibility as the expert in your technology to communicate the issue regarding the risk to the public appropriately, right? So that is related to the safety and the risk. So the lecture 8 is by Mr. Wong, Occupational Safety and Health, right? So he presents some concept. Concept 1 is about safety is not started by law. The law is just the minimum thing that you need to do, right? Do you think that once you set up the law, then everything will become safe? Of course, no, right? Safety is not for complying with the safety law, and the safety law, they are just the minimum standard, right? And as the minimum, they are not adequate to prevent the accident. So, setting up the law, yes, can help, right? But doesn't mean setting up the law can avoid all the accidents, right? That is not that simple. Concept 2 is about safety is related to prevention of the injury, right? That is the result, right? Make it less harmful. Safety is related to prevention of accidents, right? Incident or near cases, right? If we can do a lot of things to prevent, then we can minimize the number of accidents, right? Safety is related to prevention of system failure. Of course, you have a system, right? But can you do something to minimize the system failure, right? Once that is a system failure, that means that might have some accident, and then the accident can cause some injury, right? So that is concept 2. This concept 3 is about accident. Sometimes they are not accident, right?
Okay.
That means some of the accident you can prevent, and then you can avoid, and then that will become an accident anymore, right? So a lot of people, they accept, well, there must be some accident, but actually some of the accident can be prevented and avoided, right? So that is his concept 3. His concept 4, safety is not an extra. A lot of people, they put the work and then attach the safety from the outside. That means safety is an extra, right? So what he proposes, safety is an integral part of the work. When you design the work, when you ask the people to work, you need to integrate the safety into the work, right? Safety is an integral part of the system, and then it is an integral part of the engineering, right? So that is the concept 4. Last concept is concept 5, right? It is always a multidiscipline activity in the company, right? The more you learn about safety, the more you find you don't know. That means if you go a little bit deeper about the safety thing, you need to do a lot more, right? And understand more, right? And then require the lifelong learning, right? So that is his presentation about the 5 concepts of safety. Lecture live, we talk about environmental and engineering, right? One of the important concepts is about the sustainable development, right? What kind of thing that we can do, right? Even though this is damaging the environment, can we do anything, right? So in this sustainable development concept, that gives us some guideline, right? So you will need to meet the present needs and aspirations of the current society, of course, right? And we try not to endanger the capacity of the natural system, right? But if we need to do something which is meeting the present need of the people, bringing a lot of benefit to the people and society, and sometimes we need to damage the environment, that can be acceptable, right? And of course, you need to try to minimize, right, the damage, right? So the engineer's obligation is individual health should not be sacrificed, right? We are not always using the utilitarian thinking, right? We bring benefit to the majority of people, but we harmful to some people. That should not be the way, right? We try to think about, well, can we do something that will not affect any people, right? Something like that, right? So that is our obligation. And that is one important concept, is about degree of harm criteria. Degree of harm criteria is, you can divide it into 3 parts. When pollutants pose a clear and present threat to the human health, they must be reduced below any reasonable threshold of harm. Cause should not be considered a sufficient factor, right? Because that pollutant is already pose a clear and present threat to the human health, right? That is actually harmful to the people. Then you need to remove it. Cause should not be considered a factor, right? No matter how much money you spend, you need to remove it, because that is harmful to the people, right? But for substance, they pose an uncertain, right, but possible risk to the health. Then, in that case, economic factor may be considered, right? Of course, depending on the case, right? So if that is something uncertain, right, then if you need to put a lot of money to remove it, right, it may consider. Finally, if the harm is reversible, this prevention should be given higher priority, right? Harm is reversible, that means definitely that is a harm, right? Can you do some prevention, right? Prevention can be a lot of things, right? Prevention, maybe some protective thing that can be prevention, right? Or doing something in advance can be also prevention, right? So that is the degree of harm concept related to the environmental thing when we do some project, right? So there are 10 principles protecting the environment, right? Try to protecting this biosphere, try to use your natural resources better, try to reduce and dispose your waste in a more wiser way, right? Try to conserve energy, right? When you running a project or selecting some energy that you're going to use, right? And then try to think about the risk reduction, and then save product and the service, right? Try to reduce, eliminate the use, save the product that cause the environmental damage. And then if you really need to damage the environment, right, you need to think about, can you restore a little bit, right, or part of the damage or all the damage, right, by doing something, right? And then if that is really something related to the damage, you need to inform the public, right? Inform them in a timely manner, not just once, right? Maybe 3 times a month, a year, or once a month, that kind of thing, right? You need to have the management to commit for this environmental protection or prevention issue, right? And finally, you need to think about whether you are doing good or bad. That means you need to have some audit and reports, right? Evaluation of the progress. That is the 10 guidelines as an engineer to work related to the environment. So, ethics towards the environment. Very important statement here is an action is right if it preserves and protect the natural world, even if it is not necessary to promote human welfare, but it is justifiable to take action that harm the environment if the production of the human food is sufficiently great. So that gives you some room, right, for your action, right? If you are really doing something that is benefit to the human, which is sufficiently great, right, then your requirement to harm the environment is justifiable, right? And of course, you need to think about, can you do some restoration or minimize, right? That is, I think, basically common sense, right? So your obligation to the environment is you create the environment, you may doing something which is environmental degradation, right? And then you do something that is environmental improvement, right? So you have 2 things that you can do, right? One way that you're damaging, another way that you can improve, right? So engineers should share the responsibility for this environmental concern, right? Because that is often casual agent in the project and activity that affect the environment, right? So basically that is the engineer's obligation. So lecture 11, we talk about the engineers in organization, right? We talk about the difference between engineers and managers, right? And my assumption is that manager is not engineer, and that they have difference in education background, they are different in the socialization value, occasional interests, right? Habit outlook, totally different, right? So in that case, sometimes that is always conflict, or your communication with the manager is so difficult, right? The difficulty will come up to be some conflict, or even you can't agree with your manager, right? Because maybe the decision is opposed or against your professional ethics, right? So you need to understand your culture of your organization, right? Why you need to do that? Because you need to understand what is this company, what is this organization, how they judge something, right? Why you need to understand this, right? Because you need to work with them. You need to work with the people, right? Of course, you need to work with the management, right? So you need to at least align with them about the thinking, right? So if this thinking is different from your professional ethics, then there will be a problem, right? So we talk about three kind of organization culture. One is engineer oriented. Of course, this is a kind of company which is easier for the engineers, right? Because they respect engineer much. And the second kind is customer oriented, and third kind is the business oriented, right? So we name three kinds of companies. So we also talk about the engineering management decision, right? Because we said that is always a conflict between manager and engineer, right? So the decision making will be different. So in that case, what kind of decision that should be made by whom, then we need to address this issue, right? So before that, we need to understand the function of engineers and function of the manager. Function of the engineer basically is just two things. One thing is use the technical knowledge, right? And the other thing is we need to uphold our professional standard. Use our knowledge, right, to run the project or to design something, right? But on the other hand, we need to uphold our professional standard as a professional engineer. Function of the manager may be different because they are not engineer, they are not professional, right? They just want to do something which is best to the organization, right? Direct the activity of different background, right? And then make a final decision, and eventually what they concern about the financial benefits, maybe sometimes the public image, maybe sometimes the employee morale, so that they work happy in the organization. They concern about all this, right? But definitely your professional ethics is not their highest concern. So you think about the PED and PMD, right? The proper management decision, PMD, should be, they need to consider all the relevant different considerations and balance them against each other, and then come up with the conclusion. And the cost down should be, again, managers' key decision. The engineer, they are different. They try to, again, thinking about different consideration, but which is just related to the safety and quality standard, right? They don't need to balance the marketing, personnel, finance, that kind of thing, right? Obligation is to uphold the safety and quality standard because that is the requirement of your professional requirement, right? Cost is not your highest priority. Of course, you still need to concern about the cost, right? But that is not the highest priority. So we also discussed this simple guideline for you to apply this PMD and PED, right? So determine the feature. That is, again, what we call the line drawing tool, right? Put down the feature. Is it require the technical expertise? Is it require a lot of safety, cost, scheduling, and marketing? And then you put down need or not need, right? In this example, yes, technical expertise need a little bit more, right? Is it important for safety? Yes, important, right? But cost, scheduling, marketing, they are also important, right? So in that case, because cost, scheduling, marketing belong to the manager's PMD decision, right? So it tends to be engineer has to listen to the manager's decision, right? So that is the simple tool for you to determine who should make a better decision. So, but at the end, you cannot obey to this organization anymore, right? Because you cannot communicate with your manager, right? So it come up to be the organization disobedience, right? So that means you need to disobey the organization, oppose your manager. So there are three different methods. Right? We mentioned about you can use the contrary action, you can use non-participation, or you can use the protest. Right? One of the key action of protest is about the whistle blowing. Right? You blow the whistle so that all this information or something that the company they really want you to reveal to the public, but you want to reveal to the public. Tell the public about all these things that you think is not fair or against your professional ethics, right? So there are two kinds. One is internal, one is external, right? Internal is you're never going outside your organization. External, of course, is the opposite, right? You really go outside the organization, usually going to the press and social media, right? That kind of action. So why you need to this kind of whistleblowing? Because you are doing something harm preventing. If you are not doing whistleblowing, that can be harm. The harm can be to the public, the harm can be to a lot of different things, right? Depending on the case, right? So then you use the whistleblowing. Tell the people that might be a harm, right? And then you already report your concern to your superior, and then you're getting low satisfaction result from your superior, then you go for whistleblowing. That is permissible, reasonable, right? And of course, there are some advice, right? You need to document your evidence, right? Something like that. So there are several advice on the whistleblowing, right? You already try out all the process available to you, right? And then maybe you need to think about whether you want to keep this confidential or not. You need to focus on the issue. You need to keep some written records, and then you need to present you are always positive with some suggestions, right? So once you really decide to go for whistleblowing, think about these 5 actions, right? Otherwise, there may be a failure whistleblowing, and then that can be totally the other way around, right? The people will think, well, you didn't talk to the superior, and then maybe they agree or not, something like that. Okay, the last lecture, we talk about honesty and dishonesty. And of course, we talk about the form of dishonesty. That is the first one is the lying, right? And the second is about deliberate deception, right? That means you are misleading other people, right? You try to misrepresent other people's expertise, right? And then, of course, the people listen to you and then make a wrong judgment, right? That is deliberate deception. Withholding information, right? You are not telling anybody about something. Of course, that something means if you are not telling the people they don't know, and then you're causing harm, right? Like the bridge is not safe, right? If you are not going to tell the people still walk on the bridge, and then eventually it collapses, then causing harm. And if that is the case, you are charging with the withholding information, right? Or you are failure to seek out the truth, right? You don't find out the truth, and then sitting there, again, it is also a kind of dishonesty, right? So what's wrong with dishonesty, right? Unable to exercise the sort of tact, and then the people will misinterpret your truth, and then cannot exercise the confidentiality, misinterpret your advice and the information, and then of course not justify your high payment as a professional. Research and testing, right? Also have some of this kind of dishonesty, falsification of data, replication of data, and the plagiarism, right? And last, we talk about the conflict of interest, right? And similar to the ICC case, right? Conflict of interest happen when you make a decision, right? make a professional judgment, people will think you are less likely to benefit the people, but more likely to benefit yourself or your relative or your friends, right? So in that case, that is not fair enough, and then eventually that become a conflict of interest case, right? Of course, the worst case is that become to develop as a corruption case, right? So that is the conflict of interest, right? So maybe in the examination, when you, after you read the case, I will ask you, well, is it really a conflict of interest? Then you need to determine, think about the whole scenario of the case, and then determine, is it really conflict of interest or not? And of course, you need to give the reason why you think that is not a conflict of interest, or why you think that is really a conflict of interest, right? You need to give a reason. So the guideline of the conflict of interest is, shall not accept financial or other consideration, right? Definitely, or shall not accept commission or allowance, right? The good approach for avoiding conflict of interest is, the first thing is to avoid, right? You get away from yourself, right? From this conflict of interest situation, right? Second thing is try to declare to your company or to the organization that you might be involved in the conflict of interest, right? And let other people to settle this conflict of interest case for you, right? So that is the thing that you get away from this conflict of interest. Okay, I think that is the end of it. So basically, all the slides I just take out from the original PowerPoint, right? But doesn't mean that you just study only these slides, right? Because this slide that they are just highlight, right? Some other slide maybe have some more explanation of the highlight pages. I would suggest your focus should be, of course, the highlight slides, right? But you still need to run through quickly on those other slides, right? So that you really understand all these highlights. And when you answer the questions, of course, give your explanation, and then you can refer some of the theory of the handout, right? And strengthen your explanation by explaining why is that, and then why do you think like this, that kind of thing, right? Okay, I think that is the thing that I want to share with you on this revision, right? As I said, that is totally nothing wrong, right? Not even one slide is new slide. On all of them, they are from the old handout, right? So there will be a closed book examination. That means you cannot bring any handout to the venue, right? So perhaps maybe you still need to memorize something, right? So you need to select what thing that you need to memorize. But the key thing is you understand, right, the content, and then express your way, right, when answering the questions. Okay, let me see whether that is some question from student in the class or online.